Right. Good morning, everybody. Sorry we're a couple of minutes late, but let's get started with our October board meeting. We have apologies from Jora Gill, who is overseas, and from Malta, who is on paternity leave. Otherwise, I think we're all here. I particularly want to welcome Farah Islam Barrett. Farah, you're extremely welcome today. Those that paid attention at our last board meeting would have noticed that we agreed that we would have a representative from one of our groups to be here at each board meeting. I don't know if you drew the long straw or the short straw to be first out of the blocks, Farah, but you are extremely welcome. You are an observer with speaking rights. Not voting rights, I'm afraid, but speaking rights. So do feel free to flag that you want to come in if you do on anything. Other than that, just welcome everybody, both board members and attendees. Minutes of our... Sorry, before I get on that, declarations of interest. Is there anything anybody needs to declare that's not otherwise on the record? Good. Okay, so that does take us to the minutes of the September meeting. Are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Excellent. So those are approved. There are two things in the action log. The first is an ongoing communication around the change portfolio, so we just note that is ongoing. And then the second item has been completed. Is there anything arising that's not otherwise on the agenda anybody wanted to raise? If not, Ian, we'll move on to the executive team report, please.
Thanks, Peter. Before I hand over to the individual chief inspectors to talk about their particular areas, I think there's just a couple of things to highlight. I think in terms of performance... Apologies. So before I hand over to the individual chief inspectors to talk about their particular areas, just a couple of things to flag. I'm very pleased to see the continued strong performance of the National Customer Service Centre. I think you'll see in the performance annex that there's some strong performance there. I think it's also worth just noting the overall number of inspections that we carry out. I think as an organisation, we probably don't necessarily recognise the sheer volume of work that is done on a monthly basis, and I think that's just worth noting here. I think we have a continued challenge around the report timeliness. I think it is moving in the right direction without a shadow of a doubt. And again, with registration assessment timeliness, that is also moving in the right direction. I think we've got some of the best performance in August for quite some time. And I know the September numbers, bless you, which are not yet available, are moving also in the right direction. So whilst we are not there yet, I think things are improving. I took the executive team to Newcastle to look at the registration process, and we walked the process. And we spent time with individual colleagues who were doing the frontline work, and looked at quite a number of specific things. And then that's being followed up with a workshop, a lean systems workshop, which is happening next week, all week, in order to look at registration as a whole. I think it was a useful exercise from our point of view. I think it also reinforced the senior team's commitment to working with frontline colleagues to improve performance. So I'm confident that as we do more of that, and we will be doing more of that over the next few months, you will start to see a big uptick in performance. So building on the natural upward glide path, but I think you will start to see some increases in performance. I think based on current run rates, plus the work we've got in hand, I'm confident that when we talk to the Public Accounts Committee in the new financial year, we'll have a strong story to tell. In terms of, I think the only other thing I just want to pull out before I hand over is the fact that Peter and I have been asked to talk to the Health and Social Care Select Committee. That's at the end of October, and we'll be talking about, it's an overall accountability review, talking about the performance of CQC as an organisation, but also we'll be talking about the State of Care report and I'm confident we've got some good things to say in terms of state of care. So I'm looking forward to that session. So if I can at this point hand over to Andrea.
So do you want me just to go straight into the adult social care bit, or are you going to pause on questions about performance?
I was going on to
okay, that's fine.
adult social care, but Steve, were you trying to come in on? No, we'll come back and.
Okay,
yeah.
That's fine. Just wanted to make sure. From the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care's report, I wanted to draw out the learning from safety incidents. This was something that we'd reported previously to the board that we were going to do, and we're now on to our 6th publication since July. And these are very short and sharp, 2 sides of A4 long if you printed them off, but very clear about what the incident was, what happened, what we've done about it, what the provider's done about it, but most importantly, what providers can do to avoid it happening in their services in the future. And it has been very well received by the sector. We've had really good feedback from people who appreciate the information, appreciate the links that we're providing to the guidance that they can use, and I think just points out that there is a real deficit in adult social care for some of the improvement work that obviously happens in other ways for the NHS. But what's also quite pleasing is that although the first 6 of these documents have been focused on adult social care issues, there's also been quite an appetite from primary medical services and hospitals providers to look at the information as well. So real testament to Ros Sanderson, Head of Inspection in the North, Debbie Westhead, our Deputy Chief Inspector who's leading on enforcement, and Charlie Fisher in the editorial team who have been working on this and done some really good work there. Secondly, just to highlight Quality Matters, and with many, many thanks to Dave James, who represented CQC at the Quality Matters roundtable held with the Minister at the end of September, initially to look at the progress on the first year and to reinforce the commitment across the sector to quality matters, but also to reflect upon what needs to happen going forwards. There is a specific issue for us around action number 2, which is looking at sharing information. And whilst we've not made the progress that we would have liked to have made with Skills for Care for a variety of different reasons, the commitment to how can we make better use of information that comes to CQC from providers that we can then share with others in the system so that we reduce the burden of duplication on providers and enable them to spend their time doing what they want to do, which is to provide better care and support to the people that they are supporting, rather than filling out lots of different forms for different commissioners and regulators. There's still a lot that we can do in that space, and that will continue going on into the new year. And last but not least, in terms of verbal updates, just to draw your attention to a couple of specific issues from registration. Ian has mentioned the improvement in performance, but I think there's also something very important in our work in registration about outcomes and impact. And the first one, which is looking at what we are doing to really move the sector forward around registering the right support, ensuring that new services for people with learning disabilities and autism are appropriate, are consistent with the guidance. There have been challenges to that, and the first tier tribunal that was held about cherry trees, which came out with a very positive endorsement of CQC's approach. If anybody fancies reading that judgment, I really recommend it, because there's some really good support for the work that we're doing there. So those are the things that I was going to highlight.
Thanks, Andrea. Are there any questions or comments for Andrea? Liz.
Just a very quick comment to welcome the work on cherry trees, really. And I've noticed that, you know, in the world of people with learning disabilities and autism, their families, and organisations representing their interests. There's been a huge welcome for CQC kind of standing firm on this issue and saying this is not the type of service that people should be expecting to be created now. Obviously a different issue for those that already exist, but I think it's really helpful that CQC took that stance and has obviously been validated by the judgment.
Robert.
The prosecution of an unregistered provider, which is obviously to be welcomed as an activity, but it prompts me to ask this. There must be as appears to be in this case, given the length of time it took, a challenge in relation to information available either to us or perhaps more importantly even the public, and the extent to which we are able to know who the directors of organisations are, let alone anything about their background. It's different. That's a different question perhaps from being registered or unregistered, but simply in relation to fitness, as it were, in the adult social care sector, where perhaps less is easily accessible about them than even in the NHS.
Wide range of topics really encapsulated in that comment, Robert. I mean, I think that the key thing for us on this one was that the existence of an unregistered provider was identified to us, and we took action, which meant that that service stopped providing care and support for people, which was obviously inappropriate. And what we do with our unregistered provider activity is there are a variety of reasons why it might happen. People may have strayed into a regulated activity and not necessarily understood that, and we get them into the fold and support them in doing that. So there are some just legitimate reasons for people needing support from us to actually get registered properly, and that happens. There are some that stop because they realise that it's the wrong thing to do and they don't want to continue doing it. There are others that are difficult, and this was one of the ones that was difficult. And we want to make sure that we're using the full extent of our enforcement powers. And this one, it disappeared off the radar, and it was some careful detective work that allowed us to really pursue this to the end degree, as you see in the report. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes around this, and it is a significant aspect of what the team are doing. We rely on people telling us that these things are happening so that we can investigate them. It's not very easy for us to be kind of scanning the horizon and identifying them proactively ourselves. So it's very important that commissioners in particular, if they are seeing that there are services that are being marketed which are not regulated by us and not registered with us, that they flag those up to us.
Lewis.
Thanks. Andrew, just on quality matters, I remember Quality Matters being a really good, positive document, and one of the reasons was the wide number of people who'd signed up to it, including the care home sector itself. Mm-hmm. It's crucial, so it wasn't just people telling them what to do. And so I just want to clarify what you were saying about the improvement architecture that they may have responded with, because in a way it's good that they were celebrating, that we were all celebrating their success in the field, but we have 372 care homes in special measures. We have over 300 currently rated inadequate. And so the question is whether you feel that there has been a collective response from the sector seeing its own collective responsibility to improve the quality of the system. So not just whether individual people have done good things, which I guess they have, or whether they're relying on us to tell them where the problems are, but whether they have collectively picked up what I thought was the message of Quality Matters about their collective responsibility.
It's a really good question, Lewis. And I think in general, yes, people accept that there is a collective responsibility, providers, commissioners, funders, the government, regulators, other national bodies. I think one of the action points that we had for the first year was specifically around the improvement infrastructure and focus on priorities for improvement. one of the things which I think has been a problem is that each of those individual actions there were 2 organisations identified to lead on making sure that these things happened. And they were all statutory organisations, so they weren't provider organisations. Within the kind of support network of the Care Provider Alliance and others, they were working with it, but there wasn't anything that they were taking the lead on. And I think that that's one of the things that we've got to be careful about going forward, that this is not, as you say, statutory sector telling providers this is what you should be doing, or providing the answers, because an awful lot of the answers come from the sector themselves, and then being able to bring that forward. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we do going forwards is keep the momentum going with the provider sector as well as with commissioners around quality matters, so that it does become that collective endeavour which people just automatically do rather than waiting for others.
Ian.
And I think just to build on that point, one of the things that we flagged as part of State of Care was that of the 3,000 or so providers who requires improvement, about half of them either continued to require improvement, and some of them went to inadequate. So the sector's capability to improve appears relatively more limited in adult social care than it does in either primary medical services or in hospitals, where we do tend to see a bit more movement and dynamism. So I think there is an improvement capability question in adult social care.
Okay, we're happy to move on. Ted.
Thank you. Just to come back to what Ian was saying about performance a little while ago, the productivity of hospitals is not being reported at the moment. I just wanted to reflect that the inspection teams remain very busy, and they are delivering the inspection programme on time. In many ways, I am concerned about the level of their work, their workload, and I think it is necessary for us to review, if you like, the intensity of the inspections going forward to make sure that the workload is sustainable in the long term. New figures on productivity will be available, I hope, next month, and I look forward to reporting those to the board next month. Report timeliness has improved. I highlighted the figures for August last month verbally, and as you see, they have improved. And the latest figures for September suggest that improvement is continuing going forward. Having said that, this is in the context of inspection teams who are working very hard, and I think it is inevitable that we can only sustain this improvement by an effective redesign of the process of producing the reports. And we discussed this at the Audit Committee last week, and I think that's important we take that forward in the next few months, so that going into the new year we have a leaner, more streamlined process for the inspectors to work on, and that's something very much we are focused on, working with the frontline teams. So that's on performance. In terms of the report itself, I highlight there the evidence that we are giving to the Patterson inquiry next week. The Patterson inquiry, you remember, the Patterson case, you remember, concerned a breast surgeon who was doing innovative and not successful breast surgery without consent on patients and caused an awful lot of harm and was not effectively in an effective governance process to make sure that this was detected and dealt with in a timely manner. And it went on for many years. It was principally in the independent sector, but also in the NHS. The focus next week, I think, will be on our report on the independent hospitals, which we published in April of this year, which board members will remember. And you'll remember that we did highlight in that report our concern in a minority of independent hospitals about medical governance and the arrangements to oversee consultant practicing privileges, but also issues such as audit and consent being effectively taken. And I think those are all likely to come up in next week's evidence. And we're very hopeful that the inquiry will build on our inspection findings and help us drive forward improvements in the independent sector.
Thanks, Ted, very much. Any questions for Ted? Steve, it was a nil report from you, but you put your hand up earlier, so I don't know if you wanted to come in.
I was just being friendly. There isn't anything specific. I wanted to give 2 updates. One is the local system review work is on course. It's funded until the end of the year, and we're in Leeds this week and Staffordshire next week. And with Andrea's great support, we are doing a thematic review looking at the quality the quality of dental care and dentition in people in care homes, and 100 inspections of care homes have got a dentist going in as well, started this week. I think it's a really, really important piece of work through healthcare as well as nutrition, and we'll be able to report on that pretty quickly when we finish that.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, while Steve's there, can I just ask Steve about productivity in PMS? Because the chart shows a kind of downward blip in the last few months, and I wonder whether you might like to just comment on that.
Yep. I mean, this is now a few months old in August, which is obviously the holiday time, but we don't believe the productivity, the way we measure productivity recognises the breadth of work that's now being done across PMS, and there's some work going on with the team to try and redefine productivity. Some of the things they do are not recorded. Some of the monitoring activity doesn't come out because it's measured on the number of inspections that should be done or not done every month, and so it needs to be updated, and we need to share that working with the board. It's probably similar in other directorates, but it particularly hits us in PMS. And we also had a downward trend July, August, if you were watching, because we were expecting a digital pick which would help us do risk management, and the team have had to do it manually, and that's taken them away from some of the inspections. So it's quite complex, and we've looked into it, and because we manage our inspections over a year, it will increase. So the dental inspections are ahead of time, over 100% on dental. It's the GP practice part which has gone down.
Okay, John? We can be. I was going to come back and do a roundup on performance, but for the individual, if it's for Steve, carry on. Yep. No, it's not. Okay, we'll come back to performance then. So we'll move on. Chris, you're here obviously in your own right, but you're also standing in for Malta. So,
three innovations really to talk about with the board today. The first two are around how we share information internally with colleagues to support our oversight of across sectors into local areas. So although we're doing the local systems work, a team in the intelligence team have developed what's referred to as the Alex map, area level exploration map, which brings together data and intelligence from different directorates into an understanding of a local system. I think this is crucial for our work as we begin to think about how we collectively affect local areas, and having information in one place I think will help colleagues in different directorates take better collective action together. On the other side of that, we're also thinking about how we display that information to benefit the public as well. And the first part of that, we've developed some profiles for the local system review that colleagues, both the public and also colleagues working in those local areas, the areas that we didn't actually inspect, said was very useful and prompted good conversations. So we wanted to update that information and make that available to the public and also to them. So that'll be updated shortly. And finally, we have a statutory obligation to perform our consultation on fees, which will be going out in the next few days, and our intention is, as is always, to have a 12-week consultation talking to both providers and other colleagues to make sure we have an appropriate fee model which covers all the cost of inspection.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions for Chris? Right, so let's move on to performance, which is a separate thing. This, remember, is the monthly, not the quarterly one, but with that in mind, John, over to you.
Sorry, I wanted to refer to the first changes in quality over time graph, which was the overall one. I mean, I think that shows a tremendous change from 36% people in good. I'm trying to bring it up on my iPad, which is playing up, so the figures may not be quite right. From 63% who were good up to 82%, from 62 organisations being outstanding up to over 1,000 over 2 years, a diminution in the inadequate. Doesn't that graph knock on the head the suggestions that have appeared in response to recent reviews and reports that there is a question mark over the efficacy of the sort of inspectorate system we run? And wouldn't it be perhaps useful for us to formulate that in a way that can respond to those suggestions?
Can I just respond? I think one of the key messages that came out of State of Care was that the quality of care when you get it is good and getting better, and that across all three directorates you will see a gradual increase and a gradual decrease in the number of inadequates. However, the challenge I think that the public would play back would be, I can't get access to care. So when I get an appointment with my GP, when I get an outpatient appointment to hospital, I get good care, but I can't get an appointment in the first place. So in net terms, people would say that they would feel that their care is getting worse. So I think it probably demonstrates a positivity towards the point of regulation. What I think the system point is just reinforced is how do you transit across a system, and how do you get access to the care that you need within the system is one of the key things which these graphs don't really talk to. And I think probably we need to reflect on how we present system performance and system insights in this performance pack, because I don't think, frankly, it's reflected at the moment.
Robert.
Well, if I could just follow that through, Ian, which is clearly an extremely valid point, but when you say it's a system matter, is it not also a provider matter? In that if a GP is not providing timely access to appointments, or a hospital's not getting people through A&E, old chestnut, but still there, we have something to say about that on a granular basis as well as on a system basis, don't we? And do we and so the question I might raise, if that is the concern, are our ratings and inspections reports and so on sufficiently reflecting that concern?
Specifically on GP, of course, it's difficult because the interval between inspections only gives you that snapshot that's more recent, and access to GPs over the past year has included the extended access, which were pilots but are now part of the contract. So all areas should have extended access by 1st of October this year. And certainly on the local system reviews, we ask about that, and we look at whether those appointments are being taken up. So, for example, in Leeds, last year they had about 65% extended access. They now are on 100% access. All of their appointments in Leeds are booked, but there's a 30% did not attend rate, according to the people who are providing the appointments. So they have the appointments. They seem to be popular. Some people don't turn up. So it needs tweaking, but the evidence is that it's not just the individual practice now, it's across a geographical area, and that's how it's being provided.
No? Okay. Ted.
Come back to what John was saying there. I think the reports that looked at CQC's interaction with the system didn't simply say that we weren't having an effect. It was actually much more complex than that. And what they essentially said is we weren't having an effect on some of the performance measures, but actually we've shown that those performance measures are not good measurements of quality. And I think the fundamental thing is people are still looking at the wrong aspects of the system. They're not looking at the real quality, which we see on our inspections. Quality is a complex issue. You can't just say it's getting better or it's getting worse. I mean, there'll be some aspects of it that are improving and some that are not. But I can assure you that what we see on the graphs reflects real, tangible improvements in quality, certainly in the hospitals we've been inspecting. And I think we should pay great tribute to the people out there delivering this when the system is under so much pressure, as we have done before, and we should continue to do so. That does not mean that every aspect of quality is improving, and it doesn't mean that some services in some providers are not still a matter of concern.
Now, my comment was addressed to the reports on the report, which had a different spin, and I was saying this actually shows that what that perception was an incorrect perception. Fully accept the complexity of what you're describing.
Just to come back on that, I think the system out there is still looking at the rather hackneyed performance measures as a measure of quality, when we have shown in our inspections, and anyone who reads our inspection reports can see that those performance measures are not in themselves an effective measurement of quality. And really, we talked earlier on in terms of our strategy of a single view of quality, but actually the system has not got to that yet. The system still looks at quality in very simplistic terms, but actually if you look at our reports, it is a complex assessment that we make, and I think it is much more nuanced than sometimes people reflect in these reports.
I think you're in danger of being in agreement. So Mark, do you have to come in?
Chairman, I've got a question on actual inspector strength. It's on the chart, applications, volumes received. I just note there that we have increased our inspector strength by 100 in 4 months. And we're doing quite a bit of work in the organisation in terms of attraction of CQC as an employer. And this must be an indication that CQC is indeed an attractive employer. And I hope there'll be some learnings from that. But hidden in the subtext is information that tells us that it discounts those who are on long-term sickness leave, those who are on parental leave, those who are on extended or external secondments, and those who are on suspension. I was just wondering how big a population that was, whether that's something that we should be looking at, or whether it's such a small population that what we're seeing here is a positive impact of our always-on recruitment strategy.
Thanks for giving notice of that. You enable Kirsty to have the complete answer at her fingertips.
Yeah, I can give you a generality, but I can give you the detail afterwards. Our sickness statistics in terms of long term are below average, and I haven't got the detail to hand in front of me, so I don't think it's a particularly big area. We do have quite a lot of people off on maternity leave, as you'd expect with a large female population. But again, I don't think it's nothing untoward or outside of what you'd normally expect in an organisation this sort of size. And I say we do track our sickness rates very carefully because those are an indication of well-being and things like that. And we want people, A, to be fit to work, and B, to be back as quickly as is right for them. But I'll give you the more detailed stats. I'll let you have those when I've got them off Ruth.
And we have people on paternity leave as well, don't forget.
Indeed, including Malta.
That's why I said parental leave.
Yeah, but, you got it right.
No, I didn't expect Kirsty to have that granular detail, but I think the positive message is that the always-on recruitment strategy is clearly having a positive impact. And the second positive message is that, therefore, CQC is an attractive employer, so we should learn from that, find out what it is that attracts and build on it.
Thanks, Mark. I agree. Lewis, you wanted to come in.
Well, it was returning away to the issue of changing ratings. The one thing about our ratings is, as everybody becomes good, I've become more and more concerned about good. I know this is a churlish response to the system doing reasonably well, but if you look at what we find, I just wonder what message we give when we whether deliberately or inadvertently, about good services, because we on re-inspection you are more likely to go down if you're good than you are to go up. Now, maybe that's because there are certain reasons why you're being re-inspected. I accept that. But I'm wondering whether there is a sort of complacency in the system about getting a good rating that we could be playing into, but could also be doing something to prevent. And when you look at particularly in primary care, and I mean, it's good that, of course, it's good that there are so many good services, and in social care, great majority are good now, and it feels like we need a slightly more, improvement-oriented message to services that are reaching a certain standard. Otherwise, we are they're going to hit a ceiling. They seem to be hitting a ceiling as it is.
I think there's a really big philosophical debate, but to my mind, success is when every service is good or better. So I'm delighted with these results, and I don't think we're operating on a system where a certain percentage has to be below good. So I think that my starting point is success is everything is good or better. Your second point is how, even when you reach that point, how do you go on improving? Because improvement is a constant, isn't it? However good you are, you can always be better. And I think our reports are getting better and better at signalling where improvement is still possible, even in the outstanding providers. So I don't know, Chris, you're looking as if you want to come in and either support what I've just said or...
Yes, to support it, but also just to... So our individual reports do that. It's interesting, some of the most read publications by providers are in two areas. One, the driving improvement report talks about organisations moving from inadequate or requires improvement to good. But the second tranche are those organisations that have achieved outstanding and how they did it. And I think the important thing to drive in all of the sectors that we regulate and in all the systems is curiosity about how you get to excellent, how you get to an outstanding rating. And we've tracked a number of organisations, and we've talked to that, as we do, talk to frontline teams, senior leadership, and also people who use their services to understand what it means to be outstanding and what got them there. And the curiosity that you see with that in terms of how providers use those publications is interesting. So I think I accept your point about the need to make sure we don't allow a plateau, but I think a combination of the individual inspection reports and the curiosity around organisations being outstanding are important factors as we move forward.
Andrea and then Steve.
Just to pick up on a number of the comments that have been made about about the changes over time, and not to disagree with my esteemed colleague across the table in terms of the improvements and what that means to reflect on our work. We should recognise that over this period of time we're looking at different populations because we hadn't completed the programme at the beginning of that graph, and we have towards the end, and we prioritised what we were looking at in the early stages of the programme to look at those areas that we thought were at risk. So I agree with you that we have had a positive impact, and we can see that in certainly in inadequate services in improving, and about half in adult social care of requires improvement services improving. But a big factor of that change is the shift in population. The second thing to say is that one of the reasons why services that are rated good are deteriorating is because we're responding to risk. So it's not, I don't think that we can draw from the figures that we've got that 20% of all good services are really requires improvement or inadequate, because that's what the return re-inspection rate demonstrates. What it demonstrates is that we are getting much better information from the public, from other professionals, from commissioners, from our own data in terms of notifications and insight, that is helping our inspectors to go back to services that we may well have rated as good. They've hit problems, and we need to be identifying that, because obviously what's most important is that what's on the website and the decisions people make using our information is based on kind of valid and up-to-date information. And then the third thing about encouraging services to improve when they're at good. Good is actually quite a big, broad category. So you can be good and have one area that requires improvement. And so there's obviously an expectation that you're going to address that particular problem. You could equally be good with one area that's outstanding, so good with an outstanding feature, and we do very much see that those services are really on a trajectory towards outstanding. And we see from, as Chris has already said, a lot of services that are good are looking at what outstanding services have done, how can they apply that to themselves, and how can they use that information to improve their services. One of the things that I say, though, is that people shouldn't be trying to do this just to get an outstanding rating. The point is to be providing a service that is outstanding in itself, and then we will be coming along and validating that in the long term. The issue is, are you providing a service that's safe, caring, effective, responsive to people's needs and well-led for the benefit of the people that are using it, not for the benefit of the badge, because that's not the way for people to be looking at it.
Steve, have you got anything left to add?
I have, but well said, Andrea. I would echo all of what you've said, obviously.
Very good, Steve.
It is fantastic that the quality of general practice is recognised by us to be so good in England. Because when I speak to people from other countries, they aren't getting the same feedback on the quality. And I think part of this is because, as a regulator, we've shone a spotlight on the poor practices and encouraged takeovers. We've encouraged improvement, and we've encouraged some out of the market using our enforcement powers. So at the bottom end, I think patients are getting a much better deal than they did before CQC existed. I'm very proud of my team for doing that. Because it's been quite a rocky road to get to this point. So the fact that the number of practices which are inadequate has gone down is important. We are still finding practices that are going backwards from requires improvement, and we do need to work very closely with the CCGs to encourage improvement at that level. But isn't it great that most are good? And the number of outstanding practices are increasing. And I've been doing a tour of outstanding practice over the last 6 months, and one of the characteristics of the really fantastic outstanding practices is that quality improvement ethos that they've got. So if you go to the Jubilee practice in Newham, Tower Hamlets, on the border, they have an inspirational transformation director that we would normally call a practice manager. The quality improvement activity in that practice is amazing, and it's being rolled out across the whole of the borough. If you go to Whitstable and see John Ribchester's practice, the amazing stuff they're doing in that practice is being rolled out across their area of Kent. If you go to Bevan House, the Bevan practice in Bradford, one of the best practices in the country for the homeless and asylum seekers, they work with lots of other practices to improve their quality as well, and have just taken over what was a very good surgery in York, which will now be even better. So I'm hugely impressed by the way practices have improved, and doing the local system reviews, it is blindingly obvious that the solution is not to have more hospital beds, but to keep people where they want to be, which is in their own homes. And the only way you can do that is with really good primary and community services and very good social care. And the fact that we've rated these practices good allows people to have the confidence not just to go there for the care, but for commissioners to invest in primary care, which hasn't happened well enough over the years.
Thank you.
If I could just follow, the Chief Inspector have said the brilliant replies, and they've said exactly what I would hope they would say. But my question still stands from what Ian said, whether in saying that, whether we create enough incentive by saying that you've got a good practice to put right things like the access that people might get to your surgery, because that's what people are still complaining about. So it isn't enough to say, well, there's a lot of good practice around in the country. We still need to be able to say that by when we've got a good practice, are they doing the things that people are complaining about to put right? Because will that make a big difference to their rating? Are we giving them a message that they're good, but this thing is really not working? So that's my point. I just want to leave it as something that we mustn't be complacent about either.
We're not, but Steve,
we are not
quickly
complacent. I refer to the answer I gave a few moments ago, as they say, about access across a geographical area, and it varies based on the needs of a local population. But of course, that's why we go back and inspect, and it's why we have the important monitor function, which again answers Paul's question earlier on about what does productivity mean. Part of it is about keeping the pressure on so that practices continue to improve and improve the access. But you need access to really good care, not just access to poor care, and I think that's where we're succeeding.
Ted?
Yes. Well, I agree with everything that's been said. In hospitals, the majority of good hospitals stay good at re-inspection. So I think it's important to emphasise that while we do see, and we do occasionally come across an organisation that is complacent and just appears to have taken its eye off the ball and allowed things to deteriorate, that is not at all a common finding. And hospitals, in order to achieve an overall good, have to be very consistent across all their services. And it is quite a high bar already. So maintaining that consistency in the face of pressures I've already mentioned, I think is quite an achievement for them. But I should say that good is not a static level, because new guidelines are coming out, new safety alerts are being issued, new audits showing that improvement is necessary in certain services. So actually to maintain good, there must be a focus on a degree of improvement. And what we've built into our well-led framework is very much saying that part of well-led is that embedding quality improvement in everything they do. And so that has become a feature of our assessment of good as well. And it's difficult to see how any organisation can come out as good for well-led unless it has got a degree of quality improvement underway. I mean, clearly, the most interesting thing is what about the outstanding trusts? Because so far all the outstanding trusts have been outstanding and re-inspection, which is great. But actually, if we've got that judgment right, they should be driving forward quality improvement in a really dynamic way and should be able to maintain their status. And I think that is going to be fascinating to watch as we develop our inspections.
Is there anything else anybody wants to raise in relation to performance, or can we move on? Right, we will move on in that case. Paul, I think it's ACGC.
Peter, I think Ted said quite a bit. In terms of ACGC, I think there are three main areas just that we focused on. One was the internal audit reports around hospital inspection reports, and then around digital and change management aspects of the of activity. The second of those, I think, the second and third of those we'll come on to in a minute on a later agenda item. So, and a lot of what is we were talking about there was talked about in ACGC, so I won't talk about that now. In relation to in the internal audit reports and the limited assurance one, which there was on hospitals, in preparation of inspection reports, that was a piece of work that was done early in the year, following up on the consultants' work that was done a year before that, roughly, and the limited assurance was there because basically the follow-up work hadn't encompassed all the points which the recommendations had there. Since the beginning of this year, I think that the work has actually gone on to cover that off, and I think all the recommendations within the internal audit report were being addressed, and I think that's what comes through to a large extent in the improvement in the statistics around particularly hospitals reports, but all the inspectorate reports. We discussed a couple of points, though, on that. One was around the trajectory of improvement and how that might be impacted in individual months by flushing out old reports which still needed to be flushed out over time. So we might see some blips in that as we go through until we get to a level where the majority of reports are getting out on time. And then the second aspect that we talked about was the role of quality improvement techniques within this, and suggesting that in moving from where we've got to now and getting right up to the levels of the KPIs which we're looking to get up to, which will be the further you go, the harder it's going to get in a way. That it may be worth looking at using some of the QI techniques which we're looking at implementing across the organisation as a testing bed for those things within this programme. And I think those are probably what I want to say on the internal audit. And so I think we can move on to the other ones in the data paper.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. So you'll be back, I suspect, when we get into the next session. So, Kirsty, I don't know if you're phoning friends or doing anything.
I'm trying to get hold of Mark and Andrew, who were supposed to be there.
Okay.
But we can carry on without them.
We're going to have to.
Okay. Right. So I was just going to give... Is the sun coming in? Oh, there's one. Oh, here they are.
Mark, Andrew, welcome. Kirsty's very pleased to see you.
So, thanks, Peter. So what I was going to do is just introduce this, pull out a few salient points, and if we've got any detail that anyone wants to talk about, then hence we've got Mark and Andrew here to answer the difficult questions. So thank you, everyone. What I was going to do is just have a brief canter through some of the areas around that we're doing around our change and digital change at the moment. So just a number of few things first. So in terms of building and developing our capability and capacity, we have been working with a firm of consultants called Atkins, who've been working to bring in some specialist knowledge around change and change management, and helping us around building capability around our project management office to start to bring in the skills that we need to put really good governance around our change programme, to help us with our reporting and starting to put the things in place so we can really effectively track and manage our programmes of work. In the papers, you'll see there's an annex which has a report from them. It has some reports. Those, I just need to hasten to add, are draft reports. They're dummy data, so please don't look at that and think it's all red. That was just to help us. That's just an example of the sort of reporting that we're putting together, so you can see that. And the good progress has been made in that space in terms of getting that together, which will start to enable us to report on a monthly basis on our performance around that. In terms of the change portfolio and the digital portfolio as a whole, as I've reported on a number of occasions, we have been doing some work to reprioritise that portfolio and narrow down the focus of our scope of activity to really focus on the things that we are able to deliver on. And as I've said on many occasions, there's 4 areas that we've been focusing on. One is improving the existing customer user experience to make sure things like the laptops and the phones work well. They can actually get onto the internet to do their work, and they've got the good connectivity. And I think we are making really good progress in this space. We've now concluded the rollout of the laptops. We're just starting to roll out new phones, and we've got some plans in place around the upgrading of our Wi-Fi and the systems to enable people to have more effective home working experiences. And that work is on schedule to be concluded by the end of this financial year. So I think good progress in that space. Around the strategic change, we have been focusing our efforts on the registration programme. We have now completed the alpha stage of that programme. We've completed the discovery stage of that programme and moved into first stage alpha. As part of that process, what we've now agreed is what we're calling a minimal viable product. So that's the thing that we will deliver. And we've decided to take new registrations and try and deliver an end-to-end approach to that, so we can really test out the whole registration process and see how it will work. As well as that activity, we are also doing some work around continuous improvement and leaning out of our systems and processes and looking at which bits of process that we really need to make sure is as lean as it can be to incorporate into the new way of working around registration. And then on top of that, the registration progress by doing an end-to-end piece is really helping us start to really crystallise our thinking around what a replacement CRM system will look like, and so that the two go hand in hand in terms of we'll do that minimum viable product right through, but it'll also help us think about what we actually need in terms of how the architecture that will underpin our new CRM and how that'll work, so we've got something real to base those discussions on. So I think that's really positive. One area where we have done some rethinking and reviewing of our activity is around the Share Your Experience platform. And what we've decided to do there now is to go back into discovery in this space to really be clear that we can deliver that always-on approach to data exchange, so that it'll really give us a solid platform for our intelligence moving forwards. Those are the key areas around the change that I wanted to talk about. Just touching briefly on the people strategy, and then I'll open it up to questions, or I'll open it up to Andrew and Mark to add any more detail if they want to. In terms of the people strategy, we've been doing some work around developing our workforce strategy. The People Directorate went away and spent 3 days doing a workforce strategy sprint. That's now in draft and is being circulated around my colleagues, and is going to come back to this board, I think, next month for a good discussion about our workforce strategy. We are still waiting for the Treasury to come back to us around our pay remit that we put in there, and hopefully we'll hear back from them by the end of October. And then, obviously, we've been doing some work around well-being and workload, and we had a pulse survey that went out during October, which identified that people were feeling under pressure, particularly around workloads and some of the frustrations around the digital technology, and the fact that was sort of hampering rather than helping them do their job. So we have been doing some work in this space to look at what we need to do around well-being. Hopefully some of the road mending stuff will help, but also looking at how we drive a more connected workforce, how people at home feel that they're part of a bigger organisation and they don't feel excluded, and looking at how we do some work in that space. Diversity and inclusion, we had we did some work on this last month at the board in a seminar, and then working on Roger Klein's report looking at diversity and inclusion, particularly around recruitment. And we've been doing, we're in the process of recruiting a specialist diversity and inclusion lead to take those recommendations forward and really drive forward our work on this agenda. So there's nothing anymore I want to sort of particularly pull out in terms of the highlights. Andrew and Mark, if there's anything particularly you think you want to add, otherwise we can hand it back to you, Peter.
Thanks.
Just quite happy to go into the questions, Peter, from my point of view.
I'm happy to go into questions. Yep. Okay. So I was going to start with a question, if I may, or rather a comment, Kirsty. You just talked about the recent Pulse survey. I think the board needs to be kept aware of what comes out from Pulse surveys. We don't necessarily need to see each one or the detailed findings, but I certainly think we need in our performance reporting to be alerted to any significant new points or any significant improvement or deterioration in anything that we're checking on, because it's a really it really is very important to us.
Yeah, so we ran 4 Pulse surveys over the last few months in the run-up to the main survey, which is out now. We haven't decided if we're going to carry on doing those, but I think we might, because they're really useful ways of just dip-checking where we are, but certainly we can report back on the findings of those.
Thank you. Good. Right. Other things anybody wants to raise? Lewis, you haven't spoken for 5 minutes.
Do you want me to pick up on something I was saying earlier? Thanks, Peter, for that. This is my point is about the breadth of the work, so my personal plea for a sort of digested read version of where this is going. The breadth of it is huge, and it stretches from some quite specific technical matters, what kind of mobile phone you carry, through to some really quite important conceptual issues for us as an organisation to do with diversity and workforce well-being. And I suppose that doesn't matter just to me as a board member, but to our staff and to the people in the wider world and the public and so on. So it's just a request for it to be set out a little more clearly what the organisation will be doing differently as a result of changing, and how that change will be evident and visible, and in particular how it will be demonstrable, how will we measure that we've got better at some of these areas, some of which are complex, and the mobile phones one is probably not too difficult, but some of the others, like workforce well-being, how will we know that the workforce well-being has got better, for example? So it's the vision of where we're getting to and how we will demonstrate that.
Okay, thank you. So there's 2 bits, and then I'll probably hand over to Chris to do another bit. But the 2 areas. One is the sort of vision piece. There's quite a lot of work we're doing on that in that space at the moment, looking at setting out what CQC in the future will look like in terms of how it will look and feel, and how people will do their jobs, and how it can be different from now. So I'll pass to Chris in a second to give you a bit more detail on that. In terms of how will we know we've done it, or how will we know we've got better, we are currently just benchmarking where we are. So we're setting out really clearly, pulling all the data together in terms of the current expenditure around where we are, what our benefits profile is from all this change, so we know what we anticipate to release in terms of cashable and non-cashable benefits in terms of that process. So we're setting that out as a benchmark so we can track that progress. We're also looking at the strategy and then identifying the key milestones in terms of this change that will help deliver that strategy, and then starting to put that together into a report so we can track progress from where we currently are now, and we'll be able to report that on I think, on a quarterly basis on progress against delivering against the strategy. So lots of work going on in this space. I think it's recognising that it is a very, very broad agenda. There's a lot going on, and I think the change narrative will start to bring that to life for people. Chris, do you want to?
Just in terms of the change narrative, the sort of two parts that are important, I guess. One is to have a very clear ambition, which comes from the executive and the board around our intention. What we've been beginning to do is to look at three things. First of all, how do we make it easy for colleagues to do their job well? Secondly, how do we make it easy for the public and people who use services to use our information? And thirdly, how do we make it easy for providers to perform and to deliver a good service? So for each of those, we're talking to groups of colleagues, members of the public and providers around both what we're doing and also what difference it will mean for them. And the conversations, I think, will help shape a narrative that doesn't just say what we would say as a board, but actually write it in the language of the people who are going to experience the benefit. We're beginning that work now. Probably in about 3 or 4 weeks' time, we'll have a workable narrative, and happy to bring it back for a discussion here, and happy for you to be involved in it if you'd like to be. But I think that's an important part for us, because often we shape these projects with a Gantt chart that describes the activity over a period of time, but the meaningful change, and when people can expect that meaningful change and how it will change the way they do their job for colleagues internally, or how public will access information differently, it's important to write it in their perspective. So that's our intention with the work.
Ian, and then Andrew.
Thanks. I just want to build on the point Louis made about I know you weren't doing this deliberately, but almost trivialising the mobile phone point. The mobile phone point is an interesting one, because it's quite totemic of what I describe as an iceberg project, in the sense that the physical manifestation is I have got a new mobile phone, which is a smartphone which can run apps, which means we can do all sorts of other things. As opposed to a BlackBerry. But the practical point is the amount of technical change that sat below that in terms of in servers and software to make that happen was significant. So that there is something about with a lot of these projects that we do where the physical manifestation is a shiny new machine or a shiny new phone, but the amount of technical work that goes on in the background based on our current infrastructure is significant. And so a lot of the conversations we struggle to have with our own colleagues internally is they just think it's the same as going down to the Vodafone shop and getting a new mobile phone. The reality is a lot of people in the digital teams have done an awful lot of work to get to a point where we are able to issue a new mobile phone, and I think that's one of the things we haven't done maybe brilliantly in the past, and something we perhaps need to just showcase some of that digital work and that sort of, if you like, boring plumbing that goes with it, and try and make sure that people understand that it's not just a question of people not being interested in this stuff. It's technically quite difficult to do. So, but.
And the benefits are more than just a shiny new phone. That's the point you're also making. So Andrea and then Liz.
It's just to build on the point about communications, and really welcome the work that Kirsty is doing with the various teams across the organisation to kind of grab us by the scruff of the neck and say, well, what are we actually doing? What's the timescale that we're taking it forward on? And we're making sure that what we're doing is actually going to be useful, is going to deliver. The key thing for me, I think, is not just explaining, as Ian quite rightly says, what's happening and how that's going to impact on our colleagues, but also thinking about it in terms of the external world. And a particular interest for me at the moment is with adult social care providers around the progress towards a digital provider information collection, which I absolutely agree we've got to make sure that we're doing it properly, and I really, really don't want us to be rolling out something that isn't going to be robust. But equally, we've been having a conversation with various bits of the sector over the last year, 2 years, around what progress we want to make and how we're going to make that, and getting ourselves into a position where we can be clear about what steps they're going to see going forward into 2019 will be really useful. So I think, Chris, you've got it in mind, but it's just to reinforce that that is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Liz.
Yes, thank you. A couple of questions on the people strategy. I mean, firstly, yes, I was also interested in whether we think we've seen any change in some of these points that we've heard before about, you know, parts of the organisation having very high workload and also frustrations about technology. It's been an ongoing issue. So I suppose it would just be interesting to know whether you think there's been any shift yet, and very good to hear about the things that are planned, but I hope we'll shift that, because those things just seem to me to be extremely important. I also just wanted to ask about diversity and inclusion. Firstly, is the intention initially to work on Roger Klein's recommendations specifically in relation to people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, or is it wider? And also, I mean, it's great to appoint a new person. I think, as we were touching on earlier in another context, a person on their own doesn't kind of create the change. It's got to be embedded in, you know, the senior accountability and the cultural shift that we're looking for. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about how that post holder is going to fit into that wider piece, and if we've made a strategic decision to focus in on BAME initially, or whether we're kind of covering the spectrum as we go.
Okay, thank you. In terms of are we making a difference yet? Probably not. I think we asked the rollout of the laptops is definitely seen as very positive, and I think I've been out on a couple of inspections and I've seen staff raving about them and saying they are starting to revolutionise what they're doing. And once we start to move on to Office 365 and can get some of the more collaborative bits of kit working for us and really changing the way we work, that is also going to help adding to that. The always-on piece around recruitment has made that we've been able to fill recruitment quicker, so some of those gaps are not there for as long, so that should take some of the pressures off. But I think there's probably still more to do, judging by the wellbeing responses on the survey. There's still more to do in this space, and I think it's going to be an ongoing and quite a long period of work to really start to see those differences being made. In terms of the the D&I agenda, we are bringing somebody in so that we have someone who is responsible for holding the ring on that in terms of chivvying us up, making sure we don't drop the ball. And I think if it's just embedded, if it's just part of somebody's job, it can quite easily get forgotten. So that's the thinking behind bringing somebody in, so that it is their job. They are responsible for driving the agenda forwards and making us do the things that we want to do. I think, I'm sure Ian's got some views on this, but from my perspective, the work Roger did was really helpful. But I think it's we should be taking those recommendations to really use it in terms of the wider D&I agenda, not just the BAME network.
I think that would be better. Yeah, great, thank you.
So Ian, and then I know, I'm sorry, Paul, will come back to you, but Ian, do you want to add on to that?
Just on the technology point, are we making a difference? I think we shouldn't underestimate the positive impact of being able to roll things out into people's hands. I think we've been criticised in the past in employee surveys where colleagues have said that we can't do change, we don't do change is very slow, all of that sort of thing. And I think what people often mean by that is, you know, I've got a laptop and it doesn't work and you've repeatedly failed to fix it. I think these sorts of things are the start of a journey for getting people clear that in fact we can do change and we can work collaboratively together.
Paul.
Thank you, Peter. I was just going to come back on Chris's narratives, basically, which I those who were there at ACGC will know that was one of the things which we were very keen to have developed, and I'm welcoming that. I think the one point just to make clear is that I think we need to make sure that the narratives that Lewis is looking for, which in a simple digestive bit around it, was that nevertheless that needs to link back to the underlying reporting in a clear way, so that they aren't two disparate things, and that we may be distilling something, but we need to be distilling the real reporting that's going on underneath.
A really important point. There's no point creating a narrative that doesn't link to, because I think the important bit about the narrative, it's dynamic about what's happening now, what will happen next, and it has to be a sort of tangible link between how people's roles will change and when and how, because that's what people want around not just the words but the timing.
So Farah, yes, we're coming to Ted in a second, sorry, but Farah, please.
Thanks. Hi. Just on the diversity and inclusion agenda, I think the fact that I'm here is a real testament to the work going forward in a really positive and dynamic way. And we're really pleased about that. There's been a lot of action over this in the past year with board and with other senior leads. I think it's really important to recognise that much of this has come from work that's been done internally, but also that Roger's report, while it focused on evidence-based information from the RES from last year, that his recommendations and his research around the report were based and with many different equalities groups, with many different members of staff across the whole breadth of this organisation. And whilst there's a focus on the report because that's where the evidence pointed at, that his recommendations are across the organisation, and that if we get this right for the equality groups, we do get it right for everybody. So many of his all his recommendations, I would say, have benefit for everybody in the organisation.
And you and your colleagues will be here at future board meetings to remind us of that and point out if we slip in any way.
Yes,
Ted,
we will be.
Sorry.
Thank you. Just to reinforce what Kirsty and Ian was saying about the frontline staff and their experience of IT, I think they are very welcoming of the new hardware, and I'm sure they'll be very welcoming of the new phones when they get them. But I mean, we are at an interesting point where we've raised expectations of improvement, but it hasn't really fed through to their practical lives, and a lot of them are working very hard delivering our inspection programme, and I think still have a lot of frustrations about some of the systems, letting them down, interrupting their work, taking a while to fix, etc. So in a sense, I think the Pulse survey is very important to us, and I'm sure the staff surveys coming out that's being done at the moment is important, and I think it will probably reflect a lot of that frustration that actually we've said that we are delivering change and it hasn't come through yet, and that's an inevitable consequence of the time it takes to deliver this. So we have an important job to keep them on board with what we're doing.
Absolutely. And my point about wanting to see the feedback from future Pulse surveys, assuming we do that, is to be able to measure, because you're absolutely right. I would be amazed if the big survey doesn't tell us what you've just said it's going to tell us, but we need to be able to see whether we are improving over the 12 months and whether that's been recognised, rather than waiting for another year. That was the point I was trying to get to. John.
Just building on what Ted's just alluded to in yourself. We were talking earlier about the outstanding organisations that we register and how often they have within them a total quality improvement culture and processes. And that is also why CQC has as part of its transformation strategy to do the same internally. And it is what connects what Ted was talking about, because if you go to those organisations, they score very heavily on how joyful people find working within them. And equally, to gain the maximum productivity from the investment in the digital stuff we've been hearing about, the quality improvement processes which will reach every part of this organisation are key to actually maximising the benefit. And I understand, and my questions to Kirsty, I understand why you've started where you started, because those were the most at-risk bits of the change process. But I would like to see and would like to be reassured that the quality improvement process will have equivalent centrality, purpose and focus in the next iteration of the change articulation that you have given today around digital.
Thanks, John. So just in terms of the CI elements, there's obviously, we are in the process of letting a contract to build capability and capacity within the organisation to upskill staff in a consistent way. That's ongoing and will take a short while to hit the ground. But rather than just sit and wait for that, we are also doing some things where CI is being completely and truly embedded in the change programme. So, if you take registration, we have a work stream that sits under registration, which is QI of registration processes. We are identifying which ones of those need to be looked at first as part of that, supporting that delivery of that minimum viable product, and as well as the digital bit, that bit is completely entwined and integral into the delivery of that programme. So that's, I think, how we're using it at the moment, but I do agree with you, as we move forwards, the bigger CI initiatives need to be run a bit like a project. We need to make sure we know what we're doing, when we're supposed to be doing it, and tracking our progress. It will be reported on once we really get going as part of our regular update and reporting, and it will be reporting into the Strategic Change Committee, so we can keep track of it and see where we're going to make sure we actually land that and drive that in the right way.
Ian.
And just to add to that, when I talk to groups of colleagues, I talk firstly about processes, process improvement, and technology is way down the list. And so from my point of view, technology is way down the list, but I do think we have to acknowledge there's a degree of technical debt that we need to resolve, because I worry that if we come up with some great ideas, we're going to frustrate our teams again if we have not got flexible systems. So that for me, I think we need to see the technological change as important, but somewhat in the background, and actually focus a lot of the messaging around processes and continuous improvement. And what goes with that, I think, is some leadership development so that people are capable of the coaching behaviours that are required to make CI really work, in my experience.
Really pleased to hear that, and it'd be great to see it articulated in the next set of papers.
Good. Anything else anybody wants to raise with Kirsty? Andrew and Mark, I don't know how you got away quite so lightly. But, well, we'll try harder next time you're here. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks
very much, Kirsty. It's a really helpful report. And that just takes us to any other business, if there is any. Anybody wants to raise? In which case, that's the end of the meeting. I have been notified of one question from a member of the public, Robin, and you're sitting there, so do you want to come and ask your question, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Pike, Healthwatch Hertfordshire, patient representative. My question is about care homes. I quite recently visited a care home which had an overall rating of outstanding, provides both residential and nursing care, and I was very impressed with the care that was being provided there. The fee for nursing care is £1,560 a week, to which the NHS, I understand, makes a small contribution. Fees are increased on an annual basis between 5 and 8%. And someone who's going into that care home for nursing care would be expected to have sufficient funds to fund about 3 years of nursing care. And I wondered whether CQC is finding any correlation between the overall rating of a care home and the level of fee?
Thanks, Robin. Andrea, I think that's probably one for you.
Certainly is. Thank you very much, and thank you for submitting the question in advance, Robin. It's actually very difficult for us to work that out on the basis that we don't have the information in our possession of the individual fee levels that care homes charge, and they may well be different. As you quite rightly say, nursing and residential mix, there will be a different fee charged for the different aspects of care. So it's actually difficult to answer the question. However, we are interested in the basis of what it is that you are getting at. And we have done some work as a consequence of Care England, which is one of the trade associations, collected data from local authorities on the weekly fees that are paid for nursing and residential care by local authorities. So it's not exactly the question that you're asking, but it was looking at, could we see a correlation between those fees being paid and the average ratings in that local authority area. So again, it's at an aggregate level for the local authority area, not on the individual service. And have to pay tribute to Duncan Stacey, who is the analyst in the intelligence team who did this work, who has given me a very simple explanation. And please don't ask me any further than this, because this is all I know. But basically, what we found was a weak but statistically significant correlation between nursing homes ratings and fees paid by local authorities for nursing care, and a very weak but again statistically significant correlation between residential home ratings and fees paid for by local authorities for residential care. So what that's saying is that some of the quality that we see is affected by the fee that is being paid, but it's not the whole story. There are other aspects, leadership and all of the other things that we talk about on a regular basis. So it's heavily caveated, but that gives you some indication of the work that we've been able to do. It is something that we'd like to do more about, but it gives you some of an answer, but not a complete answer to your question. But I hope it's helpful.
Good. Thank you, Andrea, very much indeed. That is it, everybody. Thank you very much. John.